After a tragic accident shatters his life, a brilliant but emotionally distant pianist becomes obsessed with an unfinished melody tied to the woman he loved. As music and memory begin to blur, he's drawn into a haunting space between grief and creation, where love refuses to stay silent, and a single song may hold the power to either trap him in the past or lead him forward. The rain had fallen all afternoon over London, painting the cobblestones in silver and neon. Inside the old concert hall on Tooley Street, the air was thick with anticipation, the faint scent of varnish and dust mingling with perfume and stage light. At the piano sat Julian Hart, a 32-year-old pianist whose technique had earned him acclaim far beyond his years. His playing was immaculate, each note deliberate, sculpted, but behind the precision there lingered a quiet absence, as though perfection had replaced feeling. Critics called him brilliant, yet cold. They knew they were right. Then Evelyn Carter, a cellist in her late 20s, had entered his life like an unexpected chord, resolving into something bittersweet. Her music was not flawless, it was alive. She played as every bow stroke or confession, every pause, memory. The first time Julian heard her rehearse, he stopped mid-scale and simply listened. Her cello wept and breathed, carrying a tone that felt older than sorrow and purer than peace. In that sound, Julian heard everything he'd been missing, the heart that intellect could not imitate. Their partnership formed swiftly, as though destiny had turned them to the same key. In the cramped rooms of London's Music Conservatory, they began to play together nightly. Cigarette smoke hurled above. A scattered sheet of manuscript paper, candlelight flickered against brass fixtures, and between them bloomed something unspeakable. The duets were no longer rehearsals, they were conversations. Evelyn would close her eyes as Julian improvised, and he followed the rhythm of her breathing, answering her phrasing with his own. Out of that communion emerged a melody so hauntingly beautiful that it felt not written, but discovered, as if it had always existed and was waiting for them to give it voice. When they finally performed it at a small concert hall near Tower Bridge, something extraordinary happened. The audience sat transfixed, as though afraid to breathe, lest they disturb the fragile spell. The final notes trembled in the air like candlelight on water, refusing to fade. The applause that had followed was thunderous, but Julian barely heard it. He saw only Evelyn, her eyes glistening, the tears slipping down her cheek as she smiled. Afterward, they slipped into the London night, laughter chasing exhaustion. The city lights shimmered across the Thames as her cab rumbled over the bridge. Evelyn leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "When we finish it," she whispered, "we'll name it together." But fate doesn't keep promises. A screech of tires, a blinding flash, metal twisting, glass shattering, and then only silence. When Julian opened his eyes, the world had narrowed to the sound of rain on the wreckage. Evelyn lay in his arms, blood on her lips, whispering his name as her fingers slipped from his. Beside them, her cello lay split in two, its strings humming one last dying chord. In the weeks that followed, Julian became a ghost among the living. He played until his fingers bled, chasing the echo of that unfinished melody. Each night he sat before the piano, closing his eyes, hearing her bow, her breath, her laughter. But no matter how many times he tried, he could never finish the song. It had begun as love, now it was grief, pure and unrelenting, the only language he had left. Winter had settled over London like a shroud. The fog rolled in from the Thames, swallowing the city in a hush of rain and lamplight. From the window of his flat, Julian Hart watched droplets gather and slide down the glass, tracing slow, uncertain paths. Months had passed since the accident, yet time refused to dull the ache. His world had narrowed to four walls, a battered piano, and a melody that refused to die. Each night he sat before the instrument, the faint scent of wax and dust filling the air, playing fragments of the song he and Evelyn Carter had begun. The notes came in pieces, gentle, fractured ghosts of what was once whole. He told himself that if he could just complete it, she might return, even if only for a moment. It was madness, but grief has a way of convincing genius that obsession is purpose. Then one afternoon, when his curtains were still drawn against the daylight, came a knock at his door. Amelia stood there, a journalist in her early 30s, carrying a notebook, a voice recorder, and an unassuming gentleness that unnerved him. She was writing an article, she explained, on musicians who transform loss into art. Her presence was patient, disarming. She didn't ask about the accident, she simply listened as Julian played, her eyes closing, her expression soft, Something about her unsettled him. The cadence of her laughter, the way she tilted her head while we spoke, it was familiar, painfully so. Julian tried to push her away. At first, he kept their meetings brief, answering questions curtly, but grief, like music, craves an audience. Soon, she became part of his routine, the cup of tea on the edge of the piano, the quiet moments between pieces, silence felt less cruel. Through Amelia's eyes, he began to see fragments of life again. Yet with that warmth came guilt, sharp as a blade. Was he betraying Evelyn by feeling something again? That question haunted him, until the visions began. It started subtly, a flicker of movement reflected in the piano's lacquered surface, the shadow of a woman standing before him. When he turned, the room was empty. Then came the dreams. Evelyn, bathed in moonlight, her cello balanced on her knee. She played the same unfinished melody, her bow gliding across strings that shimmered like light itself. Her eyes met his, filled with sorrow and insistence. She wasn't asking, she was pleading. Finish it. He would wake drenched in sweat, the melody echoing through the room as though the piano had played itself. The line between waking and dreaming blurred. He began composing again, feverishly, the music pouring from him, as if summoned by unseen hands. Each note felt alive, resonating with the pulse of something beyond reason. Amelia noticed a change, the hollow beneath his eyes, the tremor in his fingers. "You're pushing yourself too far," she told him one evening, her voice trembling. But Julian barely heard her. When he looked up from the keys, he didn't see Amelia at all. He saw Evelyn, smiling faintly, bathed in the golden lamplight. The room spun with sounds, with memory, with longing. Julian pressed harder on the keys, chasing the ghost that hovered just out of reach. Music became his confession, his madness, his tether to a love that refused to stay dead. And as the final chord reverberated through the empty flat, he whispered, "One more night, Eve. Just one more night to finish what we began." He didn't see Amelia's tear fall onto the floor, or the way her reflection in the black sheen of the piano did not move when she did. Sleep became a rehearsal space for the impossible. Each night, Julian's heart drifted into a world more vivid than waking life, a candlelight room that smelled faintly of cedar and rosin, the air trembling with the promise of unfinished music. Across from him sat Evelyn Carter, her cello gleaming like polished amber, her expression serene. Her eyes found his, soft and knowing, as if death had merely been an intermission. In these lucid visions, they played together as they once had in life. The room echoed with a melody that carried equal parts grief and grace, its notes swelling like memory itself. Julian could feel the warmth of the keys beneath his fingers, the vibration of the strings resonating through the air. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Music was their language, the only one left untouched by time. Every night they drew closer to completion, but whenever the melody neared its end, Evelyn's image began to shimmer, dissolving into fragments of light. Her bow would falter mid-phrase, her smile fading, as if carried away by the music itself. Julian always reached for her, desperate, whispering her name, and every time he woke, alone, drenched in sweat, hands trembling above the silent piano, he began to believe these dream sessions were not mere illusions, but some purgatory suspended between love and release, a realm where unfinished hearts lingered. Evelyn's eyes, in those moments before she vanished, seemed to plead with him. Finish the song, end this. But what she meant by end, he could never tell. In waking life, Amelia continued to visit, her presence grounding, yet intrusive. She urged him to stop chasing ghosts and to face the wound instead of feeding it. Her compassion was unwavering, but her words struck him like dissonant chords. Acceptance felt like betrayal. Letting go felt like death. And yet, there was something about Amelia, the cadence of her voice, the patience in her gaze, that tethered him to the living world. He found himself caught between two melodies, one written in memory, the other in forgiveness. Then one night, everything changed. Julian slipped into his usual vision, but the candlelight seemed different, warmer, softer. When he looked up, Evelyn wasn't there. Amelia was. She sat beside him at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. Her voice still quiet, filled the space with clarity. "It's time," she whispered, "not to bring her back, but to let her rest." Julian hesitated. The piano before him shimmered as if it was waiting for his touch. He exhaled. For the first time in months, the weight in his chest loosened. His fingers descended. The first notes rose like dawn. Amelia joined him, harmonizing in perfect synchronicity. And then, just as the final chords began to swell, the room brightened until it became pure light. Evelyn appeared once more, luminous and calm, her cello resting silently by her side. She smiled, a true, unburdened smile. "You set me free," she said, her voice fading with the final note of a requiem. The music swelled, consuming everything, the room, the instruments, even Julian himself. For a moment, there's no boundary between love and sound, between dream and release. And as the last note echoed into silence, Julian felt himself dissolve, like a melody finally reaching its end. Beautiful, precisely because it cannot last. A faint hum filled the air, a rhythm steady and mechanical, like the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't entirely his own. Julian Hart opened his eyes to blinding white light, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the distant murmur of voices that blurred into static. For a long moment he couldn't remember who he was or why the world felt so empty. Then came the sound, a beeping monitor beside him, persistent and real. The dream was gone. Days, perhaps weeks, drifted into fragments. Time had no structure, only the rhythm of waking and fading. He saw faces he half recognized, nurses, doctors, and eventually his sister's eyes rimmed red, but shining with relief. Her hand trembled as she touched his arm. "You're awake," she whispered, voice cracking. "You've been gone for so long." Gone, the word clung to him. Slowly the pieces began to return. The concert, the cab ride, the blinding light, Evelyn's hand in his, the crash, the silence. He remembered her name like a wound reopening. When he tried to speak, his throat refused, and tears came instead. Over the following weeks, the doctors explained what had happened. He had been in a coma since the night on Tower Bridge. Evelyn had died instantly, and yet, within the prison of his unconscious mind, Julian had lived an entire other life, a symphony of dreams that had carried him through grief. "There's something remarkable," one neurologist said, almost reverently. "Even in deep coma states, the brain sometimes responds to external sound. Your family and the nurses played your music constantly. We believe that's what kept your neural pathways active. Your own melodies were reaching you, even when you couldn't hear them consciously." Julian stared at the floor as the truth sank in. The music, the duets with Evelyn, the visions of Amelia, the dreamlike candlelight rooms, all of it had been his mind's way of surviving. The melody that had haunted his sleep had not been an illusion, but a dialogue between his grief and his will to live. Amelia, he realized, had never existed in the world outside his mind. She was his conscience, his guide through the labyrinth of loss, leading him toward release when he could not face it alone. When they showed him the notebook recovered from his flat, pages filled with the completed score of their song, he trembled. The composition matched, note for note, the melody he had played in his dreams. Somehow he had finished it even while lost in unconsciousness, his body unmoving, but his soul composing. He didn't understand how. Perhaps some part of him had always known Evelyn was gone and needed to make peace with it in the only language she could speak: music. Weeks later, when the machines were unhooked and the hospital corridors no longer echoed with beeps, Julian took his first steps outside. The air was sharp, London sky a muted grey brush with hints of morning gold. Every sound, the whisper of wind, the rumble of distant traffic, the soft toll of church bells, felt alive again. He walked away slowly, each step a measure of time reclaimed. For the first time, he wasn't running from silence. He carried it with him. Julian didn't know what his life would become, but as he looked up toward the skyline, he whispered a promise. "For you, Eve, for the song we finished together." The world felt fragile, but it was real, and as he moved forward, he realized that the greatest composition he would ever write was not about death or grief, but about beginning again. The city was wrapped in mist when Julian Hart returned to the streets that had once defined his life. London pulsed softly beneath the grey sky, its lights blurring in the drizzle, its familiar symphony of footsteps, rain, and distant laughter carrying through the air. He walked without hurry, the rhythm of his cane matching the cadence of his thoughts. Every corner held a ghost. Evelyn's smile outside the music hall, her voice echoing through the narrow cobblestone alleys, her laughter spilling from the doorway of a small pub he used to visit after late rehearsals. In his coat pocket, Julian carried a worn leather notebook. Inside lay the completed composition, the one his dreaming mind had written in the depths of unconsciousness, the Bridge Sonata. The title alone carried weight, not a mourning, but a memory. It was a song that had bound them, the song that had released him. He followed the same route their cab had taken that night, his steps tracing the invisible map of the past. The air smelled faintly of rain and iron, and when he reached the tower bridge, dusk had begun to settle. The river below shimmered with city light, the water whispering against stone in eternal rhythm. Julian paused at the railing, his reflection wavering beside the ghostly glow of passing headlights. For a moment he simply stood there, listening. The hum of London faded into something quieter, older, deeper. He sat on the edge where metal met stone, took out his notebook, and opened it to the first page. The notes stared back at him with familiar eyes. Closing his own, Julian began to hum. The melody rose softly, fragile yet certain, a thread of sound weaving through the wind. The traffic noise receded, the world shrieking to the simple purity of song. He could hear her then, not in memory, but in resonance. Evelyn's cello, low and rich, seemed to answer his voice, each tone entwining with his hum, like a conversation rekindled. He felt her laughter ripple to the melody, her presence in the harmony that bridged every distance that death could not. Tears slipped down his cheeks, warm against the chill, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were the gentle release of something finally understood. Love, he realized, does not vanish. It changes form. It becomes sound, light, memory, a current that continues even when its source is gone. Evelyn had not left him. She had become the music itself. When the song reached its final refrain, Julian drew a deep breath, his voice trembling, but sure. The last note lingered in the air like a heartbeat suspended between silence and forever. Goodbye, my love, his words carried off by the wind. The city exhaled with him. The river below reflected the glow of the bridge, the light scattering across the surface like scattered staves of gold and silver. The melody drifted into the night, merging with the hum of the world, an unseen harmony between grief and grace. Julian smiled, closing the notebook and resting it gently beside him. For the first time, the silence that followed did not hurt. It healed, and as the evening deepened, he knew that the bridge sonata would never truly end, because somewhere beyond sound and shadow, she was still playing.